Hi, I'm Dan Schmidt, President and CEO of WTTW. For 50 years, WTTW has been committed to creating quality television that reflects the vitality of our region. And thanks to the generous support of Bank of America, we are proud to present 7 Wonders of Chicago. And I'm delighted to introduce Terry Peruka, President of Bank of America, Illinois, to tell you more about this very special program. Terry?
Thanks, Dan. We're standing in Bank of America's Grand Banking Hall in Chicago, a space that reflects our rich architectural and financial heritage. For more than 150 years, Bank of America has been providing a higher standard of financial services to individuals, corporations, and other institutions that make our community a great place to live. 7 Wonders of Chicago uncovers the fascinating facts about some of Chicago's great landmarks and historical wonders, its great hotels, churches, Millennium Park, and much more. We are honored to partner with our good friends at WTTW 11, and from all of us at Bank of America, we hope you enjoy 7 Wonders of Chicago.
Chicago is a city filled with wonders of architecture and design.
In this program, we'll take you on 7 mini tours of Chicago's best treasures.
You'll visit some architecturally amazing hotels and breathtaking houses of worship. We'll discover a wealth of Tiffany treasures hidden in plain sight all over town. We'll take you back in time for a ride on the first Ferris Wheel. Built in 1893, it was Chicago's attempt to outdo the Eiffel Tower. We'll survey the skyline to see how architects have outdone each other, topping off the city's skyscrapers. Even our animals benefit from living in a city of great architects. We'll see a Frank Lloyd Wright designed chicken coop and other architecture for animals. And we'll finish at Millennium Park, a downtown Chicago wonderland for the 21st century.
I'm Geoffrey Baer. Join me as we explore 7 Wonders of Chicago.
Seven Wonders of Chicago is made possible in part by a generous grant from Bank of America.
The first of our 4 hotels is the Intercontinental, a treasure hidden in plain sight next door to the much more famous Tribune Tower on Michigan Avenue. The Shriners built it in 1929 as the Medina Athletic Club. The historic front lobby still contains the Shriners' traditional greeting, Es Salamu Alaikum, meaning peace be with you.
One of my favorite things about this building is that you'll find every conceivable architectural style from history packed into one structure.
On the outside are Egyptian friezes. One depicts architects presenting a model of the building to the pharaoh, according to the AIA Guide to Chicago. The building is crowned by a Middle Eastern onion dome. I did a little time traveling on the inside with hotel executive Brian Winston. We started in the King Arthur Court.
So it's like a medieval banqueting hall, right?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that depicts the life and times of King Arthur. And
On
is
the
one of our,
murals and the paintings and so forth?
That's right.
On another floor, we found an elevator lobby where Louis XIV would feel right at home. Then we visited the elliptical ballroom, where Brian showed me the largest baccarat chandelier in North America, weighing 6 tons. The chandelier is surrounded by 36 murals. Artisans recreated them using a copy of the Medina Athletic Club's 1930 yearbook as a reference.
Now, if you're looking for a nice little romantic getaway and you've got a spare $2,500 on hand, you might think about the presidential suite here at the Intercontinental, complete with a 2-story living room, a decorative fireplace, and an eye-level view of the flying buttresses on Tribune Tower next door.
Brian saved the best for last.
Oh, man. Well, I can see why this is your favorite space.
Yes, this is the most unique feature the hotel has, Jeff. This is the renowned Junior Olympic indoor swimming pool. This actually was considered an architectural feat when it was first built in 1929 because it is above ground and holds 120,000 gallons of water.
And what else is unique about it?
Also, this was the home of Johnny Weissmuller, the original Tarzan, who actually trained for his Olympic gold medals right here in this beautiful pool.
Just south of the river on Michigan Avenue, the Hard Rock Hotel has taken up residence in the landmark Art Deco-style carbide and carbon building from 1929 after a $100 million restoration. One of the most unusual features of this building is the color. For years, it looked like a black building, but that's just because it was covered with soot. With the restoration, you can see it's actually green. The architects of this building were the sons of the great city planner Daniel Burnham. Some people think they were making a subtle comment on prohibition by shaping the building like a champagne bottle, complete with cork. The accents are 24-karat gold, just as in the original, according to Chicago Tribune architecture critic Blair Kamen. Architect Lucien Lagrange added a glassy annex that provides space for the trendy China Grill bar and restaurant, plus meeting rooms and a ballroom that couldn't fit on the small floor plates of the old office building.
So this room occupies a half of a whole floor.
The entire half of a floor.
Maintaining the hotel's hip atmosphere is the responsibility of vibe manager Stephen Westman. He showed me a suite where pop luminaries like Carmen Electra and Alanis Morissette have stayed. He said the stars like the privacy of the building's tower portion where there are just 2 rooms per floor.
And what a view.
It's not bad. We boast the best views in Chicago. The thing I like most about the architecture is that everything in the building is really a contradiction. So for example, when you're in the Michigan Avenue foyer and you see the Art Deco design, restored back to 1929, the original brass, and then you see 10 flat panel televisions. It's a really cool contradiction, and you see throughout the hotel.
Now, let's go back 40 years in time from a building designed by Daniel Burnham's sons to one designed by their father's own firm. The Reliance Building, now known as the Hotel Burnham, was one of the world's first skyscrapers. It's located diagonally across the street from Marshall Field's State Street store at Washington. Construction of the Reliance Building happened in fits and starts, beginning in 1890. There was an older building at this corner, and the tenants still had leases. So it was jacked up on temporary stilts so the foundation and first floor of the new building could be built. Then the architect died. Not Burnham, but his partner and chief designer, John Welborn Root. Burnham assigned architect Charles Atwood to finish the job. Atwood's light and airy design, with its unprecedented expanses of glass, boldly shows the world that there's a modern steel frame supporting this building, instead of old-fashioned heavy masonry walls. The Atwood Cafe in the hotel lobby is a tribute to him. The first floor of this building once housed Carson Peary Scott, and later Carol's Men's Store. But by the 1990s, the white facade was cracked and grimy, and the interiors were buried or destroyed. The city of Chicago took a leap of faith and purchased it in 1993. Architect Gunny Harbaugh of McClear Corporation restored the delicate white exterior, including the long-lost cornice. The hotel opened in 1999 after a $27 million interior restoration. The long-lost marble mosaic floor in the elevator lobby was meticulously recreated, as was the look of the old cage elevators. Guest services manager John Cotter took me to one of several floors where the original office hallways were unearthed and restored.
The wood, as you see, as it's beautiful, was black when they first started.
You got the original doorknobs and the mail slots here.
Mail slots, all the original
transom.
Some of the original glass.
In a recent survey of 300 Chicago architects, the Hotel Burnham was voted the best restoration of a Chicago building in the last 10 years. The best new building, according to that same survey, is the next and last hotel on our tour. It's the very French Sofitel Chicago Water Tower. The Tribune's Blair Kamen called it almost faultless. French architect Jean-Paul Viguier created this shiny wedge of white glass. The narrow end of the triangular building leans out 33 feet over the sidewalk. Inside, square lights set into the black granite lobby floor use fiber optics to create a continuous show of changing colors. The dramatic grand stairway starts out as black granite at the bottom. Then it shifts to frosted glass as it twists skyward, bathed in natural light from windows above. The triangular shape of the building puts elevators in the center, so you never have a room across the hall from yours. On higher floors, the rooms are skinnier and more dramatic. Chef concierge Brendan McKeough showed me the top-floor presidential suite, which takes advantage of the narrow end of the building to provide some amazing views.
Yeah, Hancock Building from base to top, unobstructed view.
The bedroom has some distinctive features, too.
Well, note the curtains here. Suede.
Suede curtains.
Yeah.
Okay. But of course, the best feature of all.
That would be the bathroom.
The bathroom. Okay. The bathroom with the best view in Chicago. Okay, ready for this? Take a look over here.
So if you're looking to immerse yourself in great architecture, you might think about checking into a hotel right here in town. When it comes to Ferris wheels, size does matter. The towering Ferris wheel at Navy Pier can be seen up and down the Chicago shoreline. It's like a giant billboard that attracts millions to the pier every year. The wheel is 15 stories high, weighs 600 tons, and can carry 240 people at a time.
Impressive, right? Well, that's kid stuff compared to the original Ferris wheel, built just a few miles south of here in Chicago more than 100 years ago.
Try to imagine 36 school buses suspended between a pair of 250-foot rotating wheels, and you'll have a pretty good picture of the Ferris wheel at the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. It was a jaw-dropping marvel of 19th century engineering and one of the chief reasons for the fair's success, but it almost wasn't built at all. Chicago had fought hard to be the site of the World's Fair, and had put the great architect Daniel Burnham in charge of its design. Burnham started building a utopian white city that would transform Chicago's long-standing reputation as a dirty, oversized butcher shop into a sophisticated, world-class metropolis. But one thing was missing. Burnham desperately wanted an engineering marvel that would put Chicago in the same league as Paris, where Gustave Eiffel had built a nearly 1,000-foot iron tower for the World's Fair of 1889. The call went out for an idea that would out-Eiffel Eiffel.
Unfortunately, many of the proposals put forth were underwhelming, and the rest were just plain crazy.
Like this 9,000-foot tower that would allow riders to toboggan all the way from Chicago to New York City. There was a gargantuan globe and an awkward telescoping tower. Even Mr. Eiffel had an offering, a bigger Eiffel Tower. These proposals frustrated Burnham so much that he scolded a group of engineers.
In 1891, he said at a dinner that the architects had done the city proud with all of the beautiful buildings they had planned and so forth, but the engineers hadn't come through with anything to rival the Eiffel Tower.
A structural engineer from Pittsburgh took Burnham's criticism to heart, the steely blue-eyed George Washington Gale Ferris, Jr.
He was hit by the idea of more or less taking the Eiffel Tower and putting it on a pivot, turning it into a wheel, and he said that he sat down in a period of probably about 20 minutes. He'd sketched out all of the broad outlines of what he wanted to do with it, the size of the wheel, how many cars, possibly even the number of passengers.
Ferris's inspiration for the giant wheel is uncertain. We do know that as a young boy living in Carson City, Nevada, Ferris spent countless hours studying a nearby water wheel in the Carson River. Later, Ferris went to engineering school in Troy, New York, which just happened to be the home of one of the largest water wheels ever built. But maybe Ferris got his inspiration from a more obvious source, earlier Ferris wheels.
Actually, George Ferris did not invent the Ferris wheel. He never claimed to, in fact.
Okay, technically Ferris did invent the first Ferris wheel, but rides called pleasure wheels go back to the 6th century, according to author Norman Anderson. This pleasure wheel sketch was made in 1620. The first U.S. patent for a vertical amusement wheel was issued in 1867, 26 years before the World's Columbian Exposition. So, was Ferris's proposal immediately recognized as the answer to Burnham's dilemma? Hardly. A reporter wrote that the fair's directors were not going to have a wild-eyed man with wheels in his head lumbering up the center of the plaisance with his contraptions. After several detailed presentations, they finally did give Ferris the concession to build his wheel, but on one condition. He had to start construction with his own money. That would be difficult in the midst of a national depression. And oh yes, Eiffel had 2 years to build his tower. Ferris would have just 6 months. Fortunately, Ferris's skill as an engineer was rivaled only by his business acumen. The 32-year-old entrepreneur sold stocks in his Ferris Wheel Company and raised the $400,000 needed to start the daunting construction. 9 different factories processed over 4,000 tons of steel to manufacture the wheel's numerous parts quickly. Its 45-ton axle was the largest single cast piece of steel at that time. Its 36 wood-trimmed passenger cars held 60 people each for a total of 2,160 riders at a single time. That's more than 8 times the amount of riders that the Navy Pier Ferris wheel can handle.
Despite Ferris's best efforts, the wheel wasn't ready for opening day on May 1st, 1893. In fact, it didn't open for another 7 weeks.
After months of anticipation, the Ferris wheel made its inaugural turn on June 21, 1893. According to author Norman Anderson, the entire 40-piece Iowa State Band rode in one carriage and played My Country 'Tis of Thee and other favorites. The proud George Ferris Jr. dedicated his wheel as a testament to American engineering. Ferris's wife Margaret made a toast.
To the health of my husband and the success of the Ferris wheel.
Eager riders could now experience the incredible view from the graceful giant. Reporter Robert Graves wrote, "The Eiffel Tower involved no new engineering principle, and when finished was a thing dead and lifeless. The wheel, on the other hand, has movement, grace, the indescribable charm possessed by a vast body in action." The wheel stood here on the Midway Plaisance in Hyde Park. Today, it's part of the University of Chicago.
How do we know it stood here? Well, in the year 2000, the university was excavating to build this ice skating rink and warming house, and they found the massive foundations of the Ferris wheel still buried right underneath us.
With half of Ferris's earnings going to the exposition, the wheel kept the entire fair out of debt.
1.5 million people rode it. It grossed more than $700,000. That would be many millions in today's money. By the end of the fair, it appeared that Ferris had succeeded in out-Eiffeling Eiffel. He was at the top of his game, but not for long.
Ferris believed the wheel could continue making money long after the fair ended. So in 1895, he moved it to Chicago's North Side at the intersection of Clark and Wrightwood. It was a decision that Ferris would regret.
Unfortunately, had a couple strikes against it. First of all, almost everybody who wanted to ride the wheel in Chicago had already ridden it. And secondly, the neighbors were not real happy with this. And at that time in the city of Chicago, a neighborhood could vote itself dry as a prohibition district. And so they foiled any attempt to have a beer garden.
The enormous cost of moving the wheel, combined with a severe national depression, drove the Ferris Wheel Company into bankruptcy, and Ferris's life began to unravel. In the fall of 1896, with the wheel piling up debt, Ferris's wife Margaret left him. Then, just months later, the father of the Ferris wheel himself fell ill. On November 22, 1896, George Washington Gale Ferris Jr. died alone in a Pittsburgh hospital. He was 37. The Ferris wheel was now an orphan. In 1903, it was sold at a receiver's sale for just $1,800, less than half of 1% of its original cost. The new owners resurrected the wheel at the St. Louis World's Fair of 1904, and it managed to turn a profit. In 1906, after the close of its second World's Fair, the wheel was finally destroyed. Rumors persist that the wheel's huge beams and trusses were reused in buildings and bridges. George Ferris's final resting place remains a mystery to this day. But Ferris's legacy continues in amusement parks and tourist sites around the world. When planners of Navy Pier were looking for a signature attraction, the choice was easy.
I think that the Ferris wheel endured because it appeals to something in the human psyche. Lovers especially, for some reason, it has become associated with romance.
Chicago's love affair with Ferris wheels has lasted more than a century. And just like its predecessor, the Navy Pier wheel is one of Chicago's most popular attractions. More than 8 million people have taken a ride on this homage to Chicago's original Ferris wheel and its creator, George Washington Gale Ferris Jr., a man with wheels in his head. At the start of the 20th century, Chicago's Russian Orthodox community had a problem. Construction of their new Holy Trinity Orthodox Cathedral was over budget, and they were running out of money to finish the interior. A contribution from the Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II himself, got construction started. Other donors gave more, but it still wasn't enough. So, the building's famous architect, Louis Sullivan, waived half his fee. Louis Sullivan wasn't known for his warmth, but he'd fallen in love with the idea of recreating a typical Russian country church, lightly embellished with his own trademark flourishes, and he wanted to see his vision fully realized. Almost every denomination in Chicago has an architectural showpiece, partly because we're a city of great architects. Congregations could choose from some of the biggest names in the business, like Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright, architects who understood how spiritual traditions manipulate all the senses to bring worshipers out of the everyday world and into the spiritual realm.
How do you connect someone to the beyond, to God? You can do that visually. You can also do it by how you impress on the senses, what you feel, what you hear, and what you smell. A lot of religious traditions use incense. A lot of them use music. At Pilgrim Baptist Church, what you see is beautiful, but what you hear is truly divine. Thanks to nearly perfect acoustics by the brilliant engineer Dankmar Adler, who designed the building with his partner Louis Sullivan. This arc-shaped structure started out in 1891 as a synagogue, serving the once Jewish South Side neighborhood now called Bronzeville. Adler just happened to be the son of the rabbi. 30 years later, the neighborhood was predominantly African American, and Baptists bought the synagogue. They preserved Sullivan's original ornament, including the Stars of David. But as a church, it resonated with a new kind of music, led by Thomas A. Dorsey. Pilgrim is widely considered the birthplace of gospel music. Hearing gospel in a former synagogue reminds us that we're all connected. That message of unity was a deliberate part of the plan here at the Baha'i House of Worship in Wilmette. Architect Louis Bourgeois used symbols of all the major world traditions in this exuberant edifice. Hindu symbols, Muslim symbols, Christian symbols, Judaic symbols, they're all put together in one building.
And I think the architect did a wonderful job of really melding them together.
The Baha'i faith originated in Persia in the late 1800s and was introduced to the West at the Chicago World's Fair of 1893.
The architecture is so important in that tradition because you don't have a set liturgy. You don't have a series of rituals. It's the opposite of the Orthodox tradition where there are very specific rituals. There's no ritual, so the building has to do a lot more.
The architect wove the lacy dome out of concrete mixed with glistening quartz. It fills the quiet space with light that draws your eyes and your thoughts heavenward. Light is also used to trigger the senses here at North Shore Congregation Israel in Glencoe. Architect Minoru Yamasaki used understated modernist design to let light pour in through huge windows and skylights. The sanctuary roof is supported by 55-foot-high vaults. The architect made traditional elements modern. The ark, the menorah, even the organ. The first modern Catholic church in North America is St. Thomas the Apostle in Hyde Park, designed in the 1920s by Francis Barry Byrne. Why does it earn that honor?
Well, first of all, take a look at this sanctuary. There are no columns. The architect was able to use modern steel frame construction to create one giant room, 95 feet by 193. And secondly, look at how close the priest stands to the congregation.
Barry Byrne anticipated Vatican II in St. Thomas Apostle Church by 40 years. He pushed the altar into the nave, so the priest was literally surrounded by the congregation, something that was normal after Vatican II, but was extremely revolutionary in 1925.
So revolutionary, in fact, that Byrne never got hired to design another Catholic church in Chicago. Barry Byrne learned much of his craft working for Frank Lloyd Wright. In fact, he was construction supervisor on this Wright masterpiece, Unity Temple in Oak Park. This 1905 structure was made of poured concrete, which was an engineering feat. It makes the exterior feel heavy, but that was just part of Wright's plan to prepare you for the surprise inside. As we moved down the winding path into the sanctuary, Vince Michael showed me how the ceiling gets lower and lower.
Now we're in a very closed down space. We've been sort of enclosed. It's dark, low ceiling, and then we're going to go in and it's just going to explode.
Oh, yes.
All that closed in space suddenly becomes expansive volumes that seem to spread out.
The earthy materials and colors are bathed in heavenly light. The lines are sublimely simple, emptying us for spiritual contemplation.
Unity Temple is certainly one of the most important buildings in North America in architectural history. This building not only influenced generations of architects across the globe. Frank Lloyd Wright himself said that modern architecture starts with this building.
Wright might not have had the modesty of a model churchgoer, but like all the great architects in this city of sacred spaces, he knew how to inspire awe and lift our spirits. When 14-year-old Madeline LaSalle strolled into the Fine Arts Building on Michigan Avenue looking for a summer job in 1928, she had no idea she was about to become a Chicago icon. Sculptor John Storrs hired the statuesque teenager as a model, and soon the West Side barber's daughter became a Roman goddess. Specifically, Ceres, the goddess of grain, who has watched over LaSalle Street since 1930 from atop the Chicago Board of Trade. She's in good company up there. Chicago's architects have topped off many downtown buildings with romantic flourishes that can be seen for miles around.
And when you look at Chicago's skyline, it's just like the class picture you had in grade school. You have the Michigan Avenue. like the kids standing straight in a row. But every kid has its own personality.
There's nothing new about the desire to build skyward. Throughout history, soaring structures like ancient ziggurats, the pyramids, and the great cathedrals of Europe were all attempts to connect lowly humans to the heavens.
The world's tallest church spire, at least according to the Guinness Book of World Records, is in Chicago. But as you can see, it's not on top of a great cathedral. It's on top of an office building. This is the Chicago Temple of the First United Methodist Church at Clark and Washington in the downtown loop.
A Methodist church has stood on this corner since 1838, when Chicago was still a small town on the prairie. By 1924, with downtown real estate at a premium, the congregation realized it could benefit from a building that contained a sanctuary on the first floor and office space above. The spire on top is more than decorative. In 1952, the Walgreen family built this 30-person chapel in the sky inside the spire. Tucked under the altar table is this carving of Jesus watching over Chicago. Most of Chicago's decorative tops were designed for a more secular reason, to make a skyline statement. For example, the former Palmolive building at 919 North Michigan Avenue. Architects Holabird and Root topped off this sleek 1920s Art Deco-style building with a rotating beacon.
Palmolive building was like the gate post. It really was entering downtown from the north. Lakeshore Drive headed right for the building. And so you knew you were in downtown Chicago and you could see it for far away. Does everything a great Art Deco building should be. Simple, sleek, tapering up to the sky. And then, it's not just stopping there, this great beacon at the top. In fact, it used to revolve with this light around and around. In fact, originally, one steady beacon pointing right at Midway Airport to show the airplanes where to go.
The rotating light was turned off after the John Hancock building was built next door, partially blocking it. Was the beacon really put there as a public service to pilots? Well, maybe. But most fancy tops, especially in the 1920s, were motivated by another reason: ego.
In making a fancy top on a building, it's like saying, I'm here. I think any architect would have to get some kind of a boost to have a building in the skyline that could point to and say, that's mine.
In 1927, architects Guyver and Dinkelberg chose a classically inspired dome, or belvedere, to top off their ornate jewelers building at 35 East Wacker. Claims that it housed Al Capone's speakeasy during Prohibition are now widely disputed. But there was a restaurant up there with an awesome view. It was called the Stratosphere Lounge. It's such a spectacular perch that today the internationally acclaimed architect Helmut Jahn uses it as a conference room, even though the building's ornate classical style is a complete contradiction with Jahn's own ultra-modern work in glass and steel. There's another classical top just a few doors to the east. It looks like a mini Roman temple atop Alfred Alschuler's London Guarantee building, built in 1923 overlooking the Michigan Avenue Bridge. That little tempietto, as it's called, was right at eye level for members of the Tavern Club across the street, and they just couldn't resist having a bit of fun with it.
In 1958, club members gathered around the windows here and watched as their wives, dressed in diaphanous veils and gowns, performed a dance play in the tempietto.
The long-forgotten plot of the play was apparently inspired by this mural in the club's bar. What Chicagoan hasn't looked for this blue light driving at night past Grant Park on Lakeshore Drive? It's inside a glass beehive atop the Strauss building at 310 South Michigan Avenue. Architects Graham Anderson Probst and White designed the building for a bank, and the beehive symbolized industry and thrift. But the blue light is a relatively recent alteration. The top originally contained 4 beacons, one pointing in each direction to signify the company's global reach. The Great Depression put an end to high-rise construction, and then came World War II. By the time Chicago started building skyscrapers again in the 1950s, austere modernism was in and fancy tops were out.
The modernists made great buildings, and they're some of my favorites, but I wouldn't say in terms of skyline effect they were necessarily the best of the buildings. I mean, it was just a straight top.
But by the 1980s, competition for tenants was fierce, and architects and developers realized they needed fancy tops to make their buildings stand out from the competition. At 190 South LaSalle, architect Philip Johnson didn't just return to a tradition of fancy building tops. He resurrected the actual design of one of Chicago's most important early buildings.
It takes its form from the old Masonic Temple building, the great 1892 work by Burnham and Root, once the tallest in downtown Chicago. It was the mark of the skyline. So when Philip Johnson and John Berge did their new building, they basically transplanted the top of that building on the top.
For years, it contained a law library, but the law firm of Mayer, Brown, Rowe, and Maw moved out in 2005. After a generation of functional modern buildings, people couldn't help wondering if some of these postmodern tops had a practical purpose. For example, many people think these are solar panels atop 150 North Michigan Avenue. But no, the slanty mirrored roof was designed merely for drama. Well then, what about the top of this building at 311 South Wacker Drive? Are these giant barrels more than decorative? Are they possibly water tanks?
Well, we thought we'd come up here to the top of the building inside the central barrel and let you see for yourself what's in here. As you can see, it's not a water tower, it's just an empty space filled with hundreds of fluorescent tubes pointing out at the milky glass and lighting up the barrel at night. Well, there might not be much of anything on the inside of these towers, but from the outside, take a look at the point of view you get of the top of Sears Tower next door.
It might not be the world's tallest building anymore, but it soars far above everything else in the city.
The Sears Tower is a modernist building. And if you look, it doesn't have a decorative top. It doesn't have a point. It doesn't have a spire. It doesn't have little finials on the top. But what it has in shape is it steps up, and it's not symmetrical. It really cuts an impressive rectangular profile that you don't forget and really is a distinctive part of the skyline. So there's more ways to give a distinctive presence in a skyline than just a fancy top.
Sometimes the way to get the most attention is simply to be the tallest kid in the class. Wouldn't it be nice if you had a multi-million-dollar budget to hire a big-name architect and build your dream home? You could have lots of space for the kids to play. Maybe you'd pick a waterfront site with great views. And add those little decorative details that really reflect your personality.
In Chicago, you can choose from some of the world's greatest architects to custom design your new home, even if you have 4 legs or fins.
Our tour of Architecture for Animals starts with the Oceanarium, architect Dirk Lohan's 1991 addition to the city's venerable Shed Aquarium. It houses beluga whales, white-sided dolphins, sea otters, and other animals. The decor is designed to make the animals feel at home by mimicking their natural Pacific Northwest environment.
In the great tradition of modernism, Lohan brought the outside in. Look at how he lined up the edge of the pool with those windows, so the water seems to connect with the lake and continue right on out to the horizon.
The modernist Oceanarium flows out of the classically styled main building. But instead of the usual Beaux-Arts details like urns and scrolls, architects Graham Anderson Probst and White covered the building with nautical references, including octopus light fixtures. And they topped off the Great Dome with the sea god Poseidon's trident.
The Shed was Chicago's first big aquarium when it opened 75 years ago. But Lincoln Park Zoo did have a fish hatchery built in 1923. Today it's used as a restaurant. Lincoln Park Zoo is a treasure trove of great architecture. Some of the earliest buildings are little prairie-style jewels by Dwight Perkins, including the Kovler Lion House built in 1912. The building was modified over the years as the zoo learned more about caring for animals in captivity. Small cages were combined into larger ones, and barless outdoor habitats were added to give the animals more room to roam. The rehabbed vintage home works well for the big cats. But for the apes, the zoo chose to start from scratch. The $25 million state-of-the-art Regenstein Center for African Apes opened in 2004. Chicago's Lohan Caprile Getch architects worked with staff scientists to create a space that makes life as interesting as possible for the gorillas and chimps.
So there's indoor space and there's outdoor space.
Right. They're right next door to each other, and we can open sliding glass doors to let the animals choose when they would like to be in or when they would like to be out.
And they're not always in the same enclosures?
Right. We have the capability of moving the different collections around from one habitat to another. And the wonderful thing about that is the smells of the previous occupants will be new to them. It'll be a whole new level of exploration.
The building gives the zoo's scientists new opportunities for exploration, too. They have hidden spaces and camera positions to study the animals. And there are also hiding places for kids, where they can get nose-to-nose with a great ape and pretend they've escaped to Africa while staying within sight of their parents. Modern city and suburban dwellers have to visit a zoo or a farm to see big animals. But in Chicago's earlier days, the streets were filled with them, and architects had a lot more opportunity to create buildings for beasts. Many of Frank Lloyd Wright's early houses included stables. But this one, in Chicago's South Side Pullman neighborhood, is the only one we know of that also had a Wright-designed chicken coop. This area was still countryside in 1900 when Wright designed the home for Judge Stephen A. Foster as a rural retreat. Horseback riding was once a popular activity in Chicago's parks. Architects Froman and Jebsen took their inspiration from medieval Europe for this stable in historic Humboldt Park on Chicago's west side. It was built in 1896 and renovated in 1998. It's now used for offices. On the south side, the great landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted designed Washington Park in 1871 as a meadow complete with sheep. It was a rustic respite in the midst of the smoky industrial city. Other livestock animals weren't so lucky. On Chicago's southwest side was a virtual city of condemned quadrupeds, the Union Stockyards. The great city planner Daniel Burnham designed the Stockyards Gate with his partner John Welborn Root in 1879. Today, the gate at Exchange Avenue and Peoria Street is all that's left of the sprawling complex. Wagons and livestock passed through the central arch, while pedestrians walked through the sides. In the late 1800s, Prairie Avenue on Chicago's near south side housed some of Chicago's most elite humans and most humble birds. The distinguished Boston architect Henry Hobson Richardson included a house for pigeons called a dovecote in this elegant mansion built in 1887 for farm implement manufacturer John J. Glessner. Dovecotes were symbols of hospitality. Today, Glessner House is a museum and a Chicago landmark. So far, all the structures we've seen have been for animals that serve humans, either as beasts of burden, food, or just diversion. But this one was built especially for animal welfare. When architect Stanley Tigerman was asked to design a new addition to the century-old Anti-Cruelty Society here in Chicago, he thought about a floppy-eared dog, and suddenly he was inspired. The droopy entrance windows in Tigerman's intentionally doghouse-shaped facade separate the feline and canine sides of the building.
Tigerman put the doggies in the windows, and the kitties too. The building's older wing has an Art Deco style entrance that leads to a terrazzo bulldog on the floor. Humane treatment of animals was part of the original plan at Brookfield Zoo in Chicago's western suburbs.
The concept for Brookfield Zoo is a barless zoo. Edith Rockefeller McCormick had toured Europe and was so impressed with barless zoos there that she wanted to do the same. Settings that were more natural for the animals, settings that would mimic the natural environment.
Architect Edwin Clark's Pachyderm House from 1932 is an unusual mix of natural environment outside and austere European modernism inside. He boldly leaves the building's supporting structure in full view, anticipating the Bauhaus modernist movement that was about to come to Chicago. We finish our architectural safari back in Chicago's Lincoln Park, where we find what is probably Chicago's most unique animal house. Acclaimed Chicago architect Ralph Johnson of Perkins & Will included a home for butterflies in the Peggy Notabart Nature Museum.
In terms of keeping them happy and healthy, the three main things that we were concerned about were light, humidity, and temperature. We have a misting system installed up in the ceiling to keep the relative humidity up.
South-facing windows give the fragile insects much-needed light. Air curtains near the doors discourage escapes.
The butterflies don't like flying through a blast of air, so they're going to tend to veer away from the door.
And vestibules flank both entries to prevent runaway butterflies from getting too far. While these animals and the others we've seen on our tour would probably rather be in the wide open spaces, Chicago's architects have given them the next best thing. Brawny, big-shouldered Chicago has a surprising number of delicate delights, stained glass and mosaics sprinkled throughout the city. The Chicago elite who commissioned these treasures in the 19th century were trying to soften our gritty image. But they were also looking for a little prestige, and of all the great designers, no name had more star power than Louis Comfort Tiffany. You can find his work all over the city, some in expected places like churches and the stained glass collections displayed at Navy Pier. But others hide in more unusual places.
This is Marshall Field's State Street store, the cosmetics department. You might have walked through here 100 times, but have you ever looked up there?
In 1907, Tiffany designed this iridescent 6,000 square foot vault with 1.6 million pieces of dazzling glass. It's the world's largest Tiffany mosaic. It took 50 artisans 18 months to complete it. You can see one of the city's best Tiffany windows just walking down the street. St. Michael the Archangel watches over Wabash between Erie and Ontario from his home at Dree House Capital Management.
Visitors here to the Granger Hall of Gems at the Field Museum often spend so much time looking down at the precious stones that they fail to notice one of the most dazzling jewels of all, a Tiffany Mermaid floating overhead.
Louis Comfort Tiffany was born in 1848. He had no interest in joining his family's famous jewelry business, but he used their wealth to experiment in art, especially glass.
Tiffany originated a lot of glass techniques, the most critical one being the development of opalescent glass, made with phosphates, and it has a milky quality to it. He develops plating where he uses more than one layer of glass to create an effect. He develops drapery glass that has this rich rolling texture to it that you can feel and see in the windows. He develops casting jewels and nuggets in molds and letting that up into the glass in the windows. So his windows really explode with texture and almost become three-dimensional.
Above all, he avoided painting glass wherever possible and instead developed techniques to embed the color within it. Chicago took Tiffany's career to a whole new level. At the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, he set up a sparkling exhibit. The centerpiece was this chapel, now housed at the Morse Museum in Winter Park, Florida. With its glittering peacock mosaic and beautiful stained glass flamingos, the exhibit sparked international interest in Tiffany's work. In the next 5 years, his commissions doubled. A few were here in Chicago, like this one at the Marquette Building at Adams and Dearborn in the Loop. A huge mosaic stretches around the 90-foot hexagonal balcony. It illustrates the life and death of the missionary and explorer Father Jacques Marquette in opalescent glass, mother of pearl, and inlaid stone. Like many Tiffany works, this mosaic was not actually designed by Tiffany, but by people he employed, in this case, freelance artist J.A. Holzer.
Tiffany was a great conductor, and he had this orchestra talent. Probably his best skill was recognizing and hiring extremely good talent. Holzer was among his very top artists.
Holzer also designed the remarkable 38-foot dome in Preston Bradley Hall at the Chicago Cultural Center on Michigan Avenue. For years, experts questioned the authenticity of these windows at Levere Memorial Temple in Evanston. Two things here aren't typical Tiffany. For one, they're painted, and for another, they're in the neo-Gothic style, which Tiffany disliked. But recently, the SAE fraternity, which owns the temple, produced signed contracts and dozens of pieces of correspondence that prove Tiffany Studios designed them. And the temple's two most impressive windows are clearly Tiffany. One is even signed. This ceiling is probably Chicago's most hidden Tiffany treasure. It used to be the top of a grand two-story atrium here at the People's Gas Building on Michigan Avenue. But in the 1950s, the atrium was cut in half. This floor was added, so the ceiling is no longer visible from the lobby below. Later, the skylight was painted and tarred over, and a dropped ceiling was added. Nearly 50 years later, National Louis University moved in and discovered the lost treasure, but they couldn't afford the $1.6 million needed to restore it, so they repainted the glass instead. Fortunately, the Art Institute of Chicago was able to raise the money after it made a similar discovery under a false ceiling in its Fullerton Hall. About 20% of the original Tiffany glass was lost or broken. 18 months' work gently cleaning and edge-gluing the pieces together restored its earthy hues. We've saved the best for last. The most artistically important Tiffany windows in Chicago and maybe the country grace Second Presbyterian Church on South Michigan Avenue. Many were donated by the city's A-list, including the Pullmans and the Marshall Fields, who attended this church and lived nearby on South Prairie Avenue. So, Neil, this is the mother lode, huh?
This is the best collection of Tiffany in Chicago.
Uh-huh. And installed over many different periods of time, right?
Approximately 20 years, from roughly 1890 to 1918.
What makes it the best?
It has a wide variety of styles that are here. They have mosaic windows. They have a landscape window of Tiffany's, which was his specialty and personal favorite. They have figurative windows with angels. And they have other artists that are trying to mimic and copy Tiffany as well. So it's a great place to compare and contrast Chicago studios with Tiffany's work.
Unfortunately, these magnificent windows are in dire straits. At least $1 million is needed to bring back their luster, and the congregation is looking for angels to make donations. From the moment it opened in 2004, this fountain managed to make the lively corner of Michigan Avenue just north of the Art Institute even livelier. Parents flock here to let their kids splash in the water, cascading down from glass towers that display the video faces of hundreds of ordinary Chicagoans. Even if you don't have kids, watching the scene is irresistible, especially when the faces pucker their lips and spit water as the crowd squeals with delight. This is just one small part of Millennium Park, a Chicago favorite that took shape over many years with plenty of Chicago-style controversy. Our cameras documented much of the making of Millennium Park.
Let's see how it was done and take a tour of Chicago's most spectacular downtown attraction.
Daniel Burnham, the visionary city planner of the early 1900s, urged Chicago to make no little plans. But the scale of Millennium Park might astonish even Burnham himself. The grand opening of the park missed the millennium by a few years and cost far more than originally planned. But many argue it was well worth the wait and the $475 million price tag. Almost 100 years ago, Burnham's great Plan of Chicago proposed a seamless lakefront park system. Downtown Chicago's waterfront was at the center of that system. Grant Park was built between 1903 and 1930 in a symmetrical neoclassical style modeled on the gardens of Versailles in France. But a 25-acre parcel bordered by Michigan Avenue, Randolph, and Monroe Streets was never converted to parkland.
5 years ago, if you stood right here, well, actually about 30 feet below here, you would have been in the middle of a vast, weedy, vacant lot right in the center of Chicago's glorious front yard. From the mid-1800s to the early 1900s, this was a huge Illinois Central Railroad yard. But by the 1960s, most of this had become Chicago's ugliest surface parking lot. Now, one very important Chicagoan had a bird's-eye view of the whole thing, and he was not pleased.
Mayor Richard M. Daley's dentist office overlooked the property, and about every 6 months he would get a rude reminder of the black hole in Chicago's otherwise spectacular lakefront park system. He decided the dawn of a new millennium was a good time to patch the hole, so he set in motion a park building project that will certainly be remembered as one of the great dramas in city history. The original plan was far more modest than the Millennium Park we know today. It was basically an extension of the adjoining Grant Park, designed in similar neoclassical style. It was to be built above the old railroad property atop a new parking garage and extend eastward to Michigan Avenue over the existing underground Grant Park garage built in the 1950s. Garage revenues were to subsidize the cost of construction and maintenance. But as construction began, it became clear that the old garage was crumbling. It would have to be rebuilt to support the park. This, combined with engineering snafus with the new garage, caused delays and ballooning costs. Beyond these difficulties, the mayor and leaders of Chicago's philanthropic community began to feel that a park built at the dawn of the new millennium could and should be more exciting and dramatic than the one taking shape.
I thought it really was missing an opportunity to do something really unique.
We had to make the enhancements in the park 21st century. The only one that is not is the recreation of the peristyle, which is behind me. When we say Millennium Park, we're talking about a new beginning of a new century. And it would be silly for us to have recreations from the 19th century placed here in the park. We wanted architects, designers, and artists that were at the top of their game, young and would belong to the 21st century. And the money kept coming in, and so we didn't deny ourselves anything. We didn't have to. We literally could go for the very best. And I think within the park, you will see defining symbols of Chicago, which effectively will become the postcard of the 21st century.
Park planners and promoters wanted to reconceive the park's centerpiece, a huge band shell fronting a great lawn for thousands of concert goers. No competition was held for the redesign. They knew who they wanted, architect Frank Gehry. His billowing, larger-than-life sculptural style had already established his reputation as one of the world's foremost living architects.
Frank Gehry never has done a project in Chicago. He really wasn't necessarily in favor of doing it. He was very busy at the time, so actually we had to wait for him.
But they needed it for the Millennium, they said. So I said, well, it would be a year after the Millennium. And they said, okay, so we'll change the Millennium. And that's when I realized something fishy was going on. So I asked them, what's going on? Tell me what's behind all this. And they said, Cindy. And then I knew.
That's Cindy Pritzker, as in the Pritzker Prize, which some people call the Nobel Prize of Architecture. Gehry won it in 1989 and has been a friend of the family ever since. So when Pritzker asked Gehry to design the music pavilion, he said yes. It shares a backstage with the spare, contemporary Harris Theater for Music and Dance, designed by Thomas Beebe. It opened in 2003 as home to a dozen mid-sized Chicago arts organizations. As construction got underway, the pavilion's builders faced some awesome engineering challenges. For one thing, the new underground garage had to be redesigned with massive beams to support the weight of the structure. A complex computer program was created to design the supports for the contoured panels, and a model was wind tunnel tested to make sure the pieces wouldn't fly away in a strong breeze. Some think the gigantic curves look like ribbons or sails. Others have called Gehry's creation a silver lion with an unruly mane. Whatever image it conjures, he wanted it to be joyful.
I wanted it to be exuberant. I wanted it to be Chicago, exposed structure and kind of honest.
Gehry's favorite element is the huge steel web that suspends the sound system over the lawn. This ingenious structure eliminates the need for poles that would block the view.
Hanging those speakers with a trellis creates a space. And I think that in the context of Chicago with all the buildings around it, it's nice to create a sense of place for people sitting on the lawn so they feel like they're part of the stage and part of the performance.
The trellis was something new for Gehry. So was his serpentine footbridge that connects the new park with an existing park on the other side of Columbus Drive. It also serves as a barrier to traffic noise during the concerts. Apparently, when the mayor saw Gehry's first design, he didn't like it at all, but after a number of revisions, he gave his okay. Gehry says the bridge reminds him of a river. Fittingly, it flows directly into a real river. This boardwalk covers a brand new man-made stream that forms the center of the Lurie Garden, a thoroughly modern perennial garden inspired by Chicago's cultural and natural history. It was created by internationally known designers, Catherine Gustafson, Pete Udolph, and theatrical lighting designer Robert Israel. Because it was built over the garage, the garden couldn't be too heavy, so the solution was to put styrofoam blocks on the garage roof and cover them with up to 4 feet of soil. The garden is enclosed on the north and the west by a dense hedge called the shoulder hedge, as in City of Big Shoulders. Eventually, it'll grow up over the steel frame. More than a year after the grand opening, one of the park's largest and most dramatic features still wasn't finished. Anish Kapoor's beautiful bean-shaped sculpture called Cloudgate.
The skyline along this part of Michigan Avenue is quite remarkable. And I wanted to make something that would hold it, that would encapsulate it.
At 110 tons and 66 feet long, Kapoor's stainless steel creation in the SBC Plaza is one of the world's largest outdoor sculptures. Because of Chicago's extreme weather, the internal structure had to be built so the metal could expand and contract, and each of the 168 steel plates forming the surface had to be precisely shaped. Originally, the sculpture was to be shipped to Chicago from California fully assembled via the Panama Canal, but that plan proved too risky. Instead, it was trucked here in pieces and assembled on site under a large protective tent. The assembly took longer than expected, and workers didn't have time to smooth away the seams before the park's grand opening in 2004. Much to the artists' dismay, the city unveiled it anyway. Even with the seams visible, Chicago fell in love with it. Crowds were mesmerized by the reflections of the sky, the skyline, and themselves. The following winter, it went back under the tent so the welds could be ground and polished to a mirror finish. That's when the beam builders discovered they had to smooth out about 4 times the area they had anticipated in order to prevent the reflections of the distant buildings from looking distorted. The project dragged on well into the following year, nearly doubling its original $9 million cost, according to press accounts.
As you can see, they've packed a lot of art into 25 acres. And I'm not even through showing it all to you yet. In addition to the Kapoor and the Pritzker Pavilion and the Lurie Garden, they've also built a fountain. And get every idea of Buckingham Fountain out of your mind. You have never seen a fountain like this before.
Spanish artist Jaume Plensa put together this presentation video to sell his idea to the fountain's sponsor, the Crown family. His concept features 2 50-foot-high towers made from 28,000 glass bricks, backed by giant video screens. Between the towers is a shallow black granite reflecting pool. As water cascades down the sides of the towers, huge faces appear. The lips pucker, and a stream of water seems to spew from their mouths. In Plensa's view, the faces are 21st century high-tech gargoyles.
I was very nervous because I think it was very risky in the way to transform the concept of fountain into something that is a little bit far away of Buckingham Fountain, which was the reference in the city. I hope after my piece the reference will be this.
Plensa videotaped almost 1,000 faces representing a cross-section of Chicago. Some of the construction workers who built the fountain were invited to sit for the camera, and some of us were just in the right place at the right time. Even some of the less glamorous features of the park will bring a smile to people's faces. There's a bicycle garage complete with heated changing rooms and showers, an upscale restaurant overlooking an ice rink, and a 3-block-long promenade for book fairs, art shows, and festivals. It's an urban playground for all of Chicago, but just as importantly, it sends a message to the world. After a 20-year period, when many felt Chicago lost some of its luster as an architecture and art capital, Millennium Park proclaims that Chicago is back. Once again, in the tradition of Daniel Burnham, we're thinking big.
Seven Wonders of Chicago is made possible in part by a generous grant from Bank of America.
It's all about before and after.
Block by block, one neighborhood at a time.
Here's before.
Here's the after. Before and after. I'm Jim Grawley.
I'm Phyllis Caldwell.
I'm Alex Viorst. We're bankers, and we're proud to be part of Bank of America. We take a very direct role in community development.
We built that apartment house.
We built that school. People who couldn't afford to own a home now can. People who couldn't afford to live in a certain community can move back. These were vacant lots, boarded up houses. Our work is about rebuilding neighborhoods. It's all the result of one company.
A decade ago, we set a goal for community development banking, and it was bigger than any bank had ever set.
Now that we've expanded into the Northeast, we've doubled that 10-year commitment.
To $750 billion.
We see it as an opportunity to rebuild the fabric of a neighborhood.
You know how we know success? When we see the flower boxes come back to the neighborhood.
Bank of America. Higher standards.